Okay, so I'm here with Koen Pauwels, who has presented very interesting research on top management teams and marketing. So I'm interested to hear from you, Koen. What is your research about?
Thank you. The research is about top management teams and specifically how their characteristics drive outcomes very important to the firm, such as innovation and firm value.
And what are your main findings?
So the number one main finding is that it really matters who is on your top management team. And we basically have 10 propositions, but for the interest of brevity, there's 4 main buckets. So it's not just the compensation that matters, but also what is the experience of people on your top management team, what is the demographics, so gender is very important, socioeconomic status, and then also lifestyle and characteristics such as risk-taking and whether or not your CEO skydives even.
And what I was wondering, can you explain very briefly to us how this is important to managers?
So if it would be one title, it would be something like CEO Matters. What your boss does outside the office is very important for how she or he will be inside the office too. So something, for instance, like risk-taking or even political ideology has been shown in papers to affect how executives make decisions. For instance, this is the US liberal to conservative spectrum, but more liberal CEOs take more risks, are more innovative, and so their firms tend to have a higher return, but also more risk attached to it. And so that's one of the key findings.
And can you perhaps illustrate that with a current example?
Yes, so one of the key quotes in there is the CMO of Harris, which is an entertainment or a casino firm, that says, well, it's really thanks to the CEO, Gary Loveman, and how he feels personally about what we should do as a firm, that marketing really gets a seat at the table. So Gary Loveman always says there's only 3 ways to get fired from the company. It's to steal from the company, harass somebody, or to propose a marketing action without an ROI predicted attached. So that's very strongly how he feels and how he lives his life. And so that affects everybody down in the organization too.
And then thinking of someone who is either an investor in the stock market for companies or a manager, what would be the implications for those 2 groups?
So it's not just how the CEO is compensated, which has been analyzed a lot in finance and economics that matters, but also what kind of a person he is. So who gets hired in the top management team, who gets a seat at the table, what are their characteristics, their lifestyles, and how well do they work together, the composition. That's very important. So as an investor, you want to guard against groupthink, that you have a top management team of people with all the same functional experience, and that may be very well, for instance, if they're very aggressive, growth-oriented in boom times, but they're not so good when you actually have to, for instance, cut costs or scale back your operations. So having that flexibility and diversity in the team is very important.
And you also highlighted in your presentation that so far the research in that domain has not been very marketing specific. Moving forward, what would you suggest that future research should do specifically in marketing to learn more about marketing implications of senior management, top management teams?
So indeed, most of the research is focused on the CEO, not on the chief marketing officer or whoever is the main spokesperson for the customer in the top management team. The research typically is also focused on things like innovation and firm value, very relevant outcomes, but we want to split that up further. And for instance, say in firm value, to what extent do things affect expected return versus risk? And most of the variables in the study, actually, you would expect them to have to both increase returns and also risk, such as, try to have more innovative products. And I think that's a key area for future research.
And then thinking about that, you highlighted that that research should focus more onto the CMO. To what extent does the CMO represent marketing in the firm as opposed to the complete senior management team?
Well, so that's a key area for future research. So there is just a few papers that looks at whether the CEO comes from, for instance, a marketing background. That research has shown that if the CEO comes from a background that is focused on output in the firm, such as marketing, but also sales and R&D, they tend to be much more innovative and risk-taking than if they come from a more throughput function, such as finance or operations.
Okay, very interesting. I also recall that you talked about some specific findings such as CEO psychological characteristics. Could you highlight finding from existing research?
So the key thing is, they call it upper echelon theory, right? That how somebody's personal values and experiences are really strongly affects how he or she behaves in the office. So things like I said, liberal ideology, risk-taking, and things like that you can measure relatively easily. You see that in the stories, and so it's basically a justification of the intuition that the personality of your boss really matters for also how he is as a leader.
So what I found particularly interesting that you spoke about narcissism and recent papers that have come out. What is this about, very briefly?
So the more narcissistic the CEO or the more overconfident, right? The more risks that person will be taking. Also, there's a very interesting U-shaped relationship between socioeconomic status. So the research has found that CEOs that are very rich from themselves, that have old money, they're very comfortable and also comfortable taking risks with the firm. CEOs that come from a lower economic background also take lots of risk because they have to prove themselves and have little to lose, whereas CEOs that come from a middle background in the sample actually are most conservative and are too afraid to take risks.
Okay, that's very interesting, especially considering that there is no optimal level of risk-taking. You need to be risk-taking for innovation, but you can also overdo it and risk the firm.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for this interview.